Hi guys, my name's Doug, I'm an alcoholic.
Doug.
First of all, thank you very much for sharing, Stella, I really appreciate it. When I got up this morning and I was coming to the meeting, I wasn't nervous, but as soon as I arrived here and opened the hall, well, bang, there you have it. But that's just the way it goes. What I'm going to try and do today is just give my experiences of what it was like, what happened, what it's like now. And I'll try not to dwell too long on the war stories, but they are important to my recovery in seeing the progress of my disease throughout my life. I was born in northern Rhodesia, now Zambia, in 55, last century. And I grew up in the middle of the bush in a small mining community, and it was an absolutely fantastic childhood. Everybody knew each other, it was safe, you could walk around, do what you wanted. And we were given free rein as children, much more than what we have today. I could go walking by myself, which I did. And from the age of 6, I started staying not living in the bush, but spending a tremendous amount of time in the bush. And this became my familiar place, being by myself, away from people. I was scared of people. It wasn't that I felt that I didn't fit in, I was just scared of people. I just saw no necessity once I was able to get into the bush to integrate with people. And that continued throughout my life. At the age of 9, we were sent down to boarding school here in South Africa, and I went to Morris Brothers College in Maritzburg, and that was my first introduction to religion. And it was a very strict order. It was an all-boys school, and being 9 years of age, having absolutely no idea of why I was there, why I wasn't going to see my parents. I never ever adapted to boarding school, and I actually hated it from day one. When I was 11, I had a serious experience that put me in absolute terror for the next 2.5 years. Eventually I ran away from there, and the only reason I ran away was so that I could get expelled, which happened. My folks were still up in Zambia, and I went and I stayed with my aunt and uncle in Johannesburg. They had 6 kids, so it was quite crowded, but it was fantastic. And it was the first time I was actually exposed to a proper family life. Unfortunately, our family was very dysfunctional. It was dysfunctional in a way that everybody did their own thing, basically, and they weren't called out or whatever. But in this family, I got to know what family life was like. And it was fantastic. I was only there for a year, but a big change came around is that being in an all-boys boarding school and secluded from society, basically, I then went to a government co-ed school, and that blew my mind. I mean, it was just totally different. Anyway, I failed standard 7, and then I went back to an all-boys school where my folks moved out. And I did very well at school, I have to admit, and I actually enjoyed my schooling, especially when I was a day scholar, because I could go to school and I could come back and I could be by myself. And that was me throughout the years. Then when I left school, I'd always had a passion for wildlife, always had a passion for the bush, and I decided to become a game ranger. So I went to Pretoria and I started to study nature conservation and management. It was the first diploma of its type run in the country, and eventually it became the minimum standard to get into game ranging. It started off as a university degree, but there were so few of us that actually signed up for the university degree that they changed it to a diploma, and a lot more people came through. Anyway, I was 20 years of age when I picked up alcohol for the first time. My father was an alcoholic, and I saw the damage that he had done to our family, particularly my mother, who was not well. She was a chronic diabetic. But it didn't really register. I just thought that was the norm, and I didn't want to drink. I just didn't feel like it. I didn't even experiment, which was, I suppose, strange, but that's the way it was. When I went to college, I moved into a 2-bedroom flat with there were 7 of us in total, so it was absolute chaos. But it was such good fun, it really was. In those days, students in Pretoria could basically get away with murder. It was just accepted that students were mad and they were wild. And we had some really, really good times. Anyway, that's when I was 20, when I picked up alcohol for the first time. And the effect of that alcohol was incredible. All my fears, all my inhibitions, everything, they just went straight out the window. And right from the beginning, I drank to excess. I drank as much as I could, whenever I could. Anyway, the disease hadn't progressed to a stage where it actually affected my college, my studying. And I did very well in college, and I passed. And my first job as a game ranger was with the Free State Department of Conservation. And I started off in Bloemfontein, but then I was sent up, and I ended up in a place called the Nasel, which is the Water Affairs village on Vaal Dam. And I had a huge 4-bedroomed house there, and there was myself, a small couch, a mattress on the floor, and that was it, and my dog. And that was it. But I was in charge of 1/3 of the Free State, and I used to travel around with myself, my game guard, Petros and Tandang, and my dog, and visit farms and help them introduce game, advise them on how to fence their properties, what game to introduce, all that type of stuff, carrying capacities. Anyway, that's getting technical. While I was in the Free State, I didn't drink. If I went home and I visited my folks, I'd have a couple of beers with my dad, but that was it. I didn't drink much. Anyway, I was offered a job with Natal Parks Board, and I decided, fantastic, I don't have to be a zone officer, I can move into a reserve. And so I joined the Natal Parks Board, and my first station was just down the road here at Burn Crooks Nature Reserve. And my first boss in conservation here in Parks Board was, he was renowned for it, I'm afraid, but it's true. We didn't get on well together at all. And I didn't know how to confront anybody. I didn't know how to not take charge, but to say, hey, listen, what you're doing now is totally unacceptable. And so what I did is I turned back to alcohol, and the disease started to progress. And it got very bad. Luckily, what happened there is instead of there being consequences work-wise, I got called up into to do my national service. I did 2 years in the South African Navy, which I really, really enjoyed. And I had a very, very good time in the Navy. And if you don't drink in the Navy, well, then you're an oddity. So yeah, I was quite at home as far as that was concerned. Anyway, I finished my 2 years national service, and I was then posted to False Bay Park, which is on Lake St. Lucia. And it was an absolutely outstanding experience. I did a lot of work on the water. It was during the big culling seasons of Natal. Some of you might remember it, that's back in the 70s. And I fulfilled my passion for hunting, for culling, for all that type of stuff. Because that was one of my motivations of going into conservation, was to do hunting, to do game hunting and game control. I learned a tremendous amount at False Bay. My boss was a very, very difficult person. He really, really was. But in the end, we became very good friends, and he taught me a tremendous amount about conservation, about work ethic, this type of stuff. He was very, very hard. First name was Richard, but everybody called him Dick, and it fitted. So now, once I left, while I was at False Bay, I met my first wife, Jill, and it was there that I proposed to her and we got married. I then got transferred to Ndormo Game Reserve, right up in the Mozambique border. Once again as a zone officer, it wasn't ideal, but it was moving back to reserves. They wanted to transfer me to the Drakensberg, but I refused because I hate the cold. So they sent me to Ndormo. Anyway, we got married and had a fantastic time at Ndormo. Excepting that I found that the work situation was untenable. Once again, I had a boss that I thought was unreasonable. And it was all about my feelings and not confronting the situation, because if I had, things may have been different, they may not, I don't know. But I didn't confront situations. Eventually I got promoted, and this shows the insanity of how this disease can progress, because the drinking progressed while I was at Ndormo, but not to a degree that it had a major effect. And the only reason being is that the nearest bottle store was about 170 km away. And to get there was a real hectic trip in those days. It was all dirt roads. The pass through Giussini was all dirt in those days, and it was hectic. So just to get there was an absolute mission. Anyway, I got involved at Ndormo, and I think about it now very fondly. They cancelled our honeymoon, and they said, no, you've got to go and relieve at Bunganek at Cozy Bay, because they had no one to run the turtle survey. And that's where we spent our honeymoon, was camping. And Bunganek is a little wooden hut type thing right on the beach in the middle of nowhere, and at night we used to go out and tag turtles or tag hatchlings as they went back into the ocean. It was an absolutely fantastic time. Anyway, things progressed at Ndormo, and I withdrew from actually trying to do my job because I wasn't given the wherewithal to do it, but that's beside the point. Anyway, I got promoted and they transferred me to Shishui Amphalosi complex. And when I was sent there, I was given the title of Senior Ranger without portfolio. And this was burnt in big time because I didn't have a title. I was without portfolio, so I believed I was just a gopher. And it wasn't the case. The thing is, they realized that they had to move me from Ndormo because KwaZulu Conservation had come in, so Natal Passport didn't actually have a role in the area. Anyway, I decided that I was being hard done by, not thinking, oh, well, you're just being promoted, get on with it. No. The promotion was, I deserved that promotion, but now you're being unfair by not giving me the title. So we left and moved up to Johannesburg, and that's where the wheels really started to fall off. Moved up to Joburg, and I got a job with my father-in-law. Not a good move, but with my father-in-law in base mineral mining. And I ran five small base mineral mining operations situated throughout the Transvaal in seriously inaccessible places, but it was fantastic, suited me down to the ground. Bought a property, built a house, did all the infrastructure myself, which was a good experience, and I learned a lot. But the wheels started to turn, and the disease progressed to such an extent that it became totally unmanageable, and it started affecting my work, but more than ever, it started affecting my home life. I didn't recognize it at the time. I wasn't prepared to. So what happened there is that in 1981, I tried to commit suicide, and I ended up in Joburg General Hospital for the first time in hospital in the psych ward. And it was suggested that I go and visit a psychiatrist, which I did, and I was diagnosed with all kinds of weird and wonderful things, as a lot of people here have experience with, and I was put on medication. So I now had the dual import input of alcohol and medication, and it's a very, very toxic mix. It really, really is. But I carried on, and although I had this medication, my behavior didn't change. It was all about me. It was what I needed. And the relationship got really, really bad because I believed that I deserved better from my wife. She had to fix me. She had to make me feel happy. But I didn't put in the effort, well, not enough effort into the relationship. So things soured. While we was there, my first son was born. Jeffrey was born. And we were there for 5 years. Then I decided to go back to conservation. And I got a job in KwaZulu, with KwaZulu Department of Nature Conservation. And at that time it was still a homeland under apartheid, so we couldn't be appointed permanently, we had to be on contract. But the big thing that I've come to realize now is that for 3.5 years, from when I started, for 3.5 years I lived in absolute and utter terror with my boss. And the reason for that is that when I was interviewed, my then boss, the famous Natal Game Ranger, Nick Steele, asked me if I had any problems. And I said no. Meantime, I was sitting there with a 6-month implant for alcohol. And I was dishonest. I didn't disclose it. I'm not going to go into the details of how my boss found out about it, but it was through gossip. And he found out about it and he blackmailed me. He said, listen, if you don't do what I say, just jump when I say jump, I'm going to expose you. And instead of confronting that and going back and speaking to the director, I didn't. And I lived in absolute terror for 3.5 years. Eventually, he got his own comeuppance. He hung himself on his own petard. It was his own fault. And so I was free from there. And we lived in Jacini, then I moved to a place called Manzangwenya, which is between Cozy Bay and Sordwana Bay and Cozy Bay, right on the beach in the middle of nowhere. Fantastic. Jill was pregnant at that time, and my daughter was born, Kelly was born. And it wasn't long after that they were up in Johannesburg visiting Jill's folks. And I went down to Mkuzi. I was on my way up to Joburg for time off. And I overnighted at Mkuzi. And I met a woman there. And I was unfaithful. And what I thought, and this is once again the insanity of not being able to reason, is when I got up to Johannesburg, I told Jill about it. And I justified that, well, if I tell her, everything's going to be cool. And if she overreacts, well, that's her problem. I've been honest. And that was me using honesty as a weapon of destruction, basically. And the inevitable happened. There was huge fallout from that. We got divorced. But I left them at their folks' place. And I went back to Manzangwenya and carried on with Mariana. And I didn't realize that it had a massive effect on the family, and it destroyed that family, and the effect that it had on Jill, and the effect that it had on my children. I reaped the consequences, but at the time I was just thinking of myself, and I wanted to do this, and Jill wasn't doing for me what Mariana could do for me, and all this type of stuff, all about me. Anyway, for 2 years, Mariana and I had this relationship, and we fixed off each other. She was an alcoholic, I was an alcoholic, so it suited us down to the ground. Anyway, that came to an end, and I met my second wife, Sarah, who worked for conservation. And I needed somebody to carry me, I needed somebody to fix me, somebody to run my life, basically. And we got married, I got promoted, I became the head of half of KwaZulu, the conservation management unit. We moved to Ulundi. I developed a brand new game reserve from the ground up. Introduced game, did all the fencing, all that type of stuff, which is an incredible experience. I then got promoted to an area position. And eventually that went on, and we moved to Ishawi. I bought a house in Ishawi, started fixed that up. But at work, and this is where the sort of duality came in, at work I did well. I did fantastic. I got my promotions. I was seen as being capable, but at home things were totally different. There was no input from my side, and at the same time as being alcoholic, the medication situation, because it wasn't helping, there were all these changes in the regime, and it was constantly being added to, because I would have this symptom, and then bang, take that. I would have this symptom, bang, take that. Then the side effects had a roll on, so I used to rattle around like a miracle. But I didn't see anything in it, and my behavior was horrendous at home. And what happened there in 2001, 2001, things had come to such a head that it was decided there were a group of people, and once again, people doing for me what I couldn't do for myself. They got me into rehab for the first time. And after that rehab in 2001, it wasn't a 12-step program. And for those of you who've had the experience, it's very, very hard to listen to a neurosurgeon or brain surgeon when you just had your morning medication, and to try and understand it. So it didn't do much. The only thing that it did do is that was the first place that I actually admitted that I had a problem with alcohol. The only thing that I got from there was the suggestion that I join Alcoholics Anonymous, which when I came out of rehab, I did. And there was something in Alcoholics Anonymous that kept me going back to meetings. I knew absolutely nothing about the program. I didn't have a sponsor. I didn't even know they existed. I read the big book. The only thing that really resonated with me was the stories in the back, because I knew nothing about the program. But I kept on going back. I went to a fellowship in Maritzburg, and unfortunately there it was a case of position and ego that ran the meeting, and that really turned me off. Then I went to another fellowship in Howick West, and it was an all-Indian fellowship. I was the only white person there. And the warmth and the acceptance that I felt there was absolutely incredible. And I settled in. I got service positions. I had to laugh the other day. I was thinking about it. And I was nominated as a secretary for the group. I said, oh, this is cool. Yeah, I've been a secretary before. Yeah. And I arrived with my pens, my pencils, and exam pad. I was now going to take minutes, because this is what a secretary does. And I was kindly informed, hey, listen, we don't take minutes at an AA meeting. But that's how little I knew about the program and how it worked. But I kept on going back. Things went from bad to worse at home, and my behavior, although I wasn't drinking, so the alcohol had nothing to do with it, but I was on all these medications. And the behavior became worse and worse. My health became worse and worse. And the relationship between me and Sarah just soured completely. In the interim, we'd had 2 boys, Matthew and Dougie. And eventually what happened, we moved to Curry's Coast. We had a small farm. I left conservation and joined environmental affairs as a deputy director. And I learned a hell of a lot in environmental affairs. I was there for 7 years. Then I took early retirement. And I was living on the farm. And this was prior to 2001. And things were just crazy. I had small businesses, I had livestock, but nothing happened. And my behavior didn't change. Anyway, once I'd given up alcohol, psychiatry became my solution in all its forms. Eventually there was nothing happening on the medication, and it was suggested that I have shock therapy, which I agreed to because I knew nothing about it, and I trusted my psychiatrist. So I went in 12 sessions of shock therapy, and I was blown out for like 4 years. I didn't quite shuffle around, but I just used to glide around, not aware of where I was. Anyway, the end of it all, we got divorced. Sarah had enough, and she said to me, no, this is it, take road, which I had to. I had to move in with my father, who we had absolutely no relationship at all. He was an active alcoholic, and I wasn't drinking. So that was a challenge, and I stayed there for 2.5 years. Then I got a cottage by myself, and that was a really, really bad move. Still wasn't drinking, but the medication continued. And there at the cottage, I had no discipline, I had no routine or whatever, and I started abusing my medications. I get a month's supply, and I might take it, I might not, I might use everything in a week. I might leave it and store it up for 2 months and then crack it in a week. Really crazy stuff. So I was never constant. I was always up and down, up and down, up and down. Eventually it got so bad that my landlord, actually, his daughter-in-law was the nurse, a psychiatric nurse, and she said, no, you better get this guy some help. And they did, and I went into Town Hill Hospital, a mental hospital in Maritzburg, for the 3rd time, but this time I went into the lockup wards. And I was in the lockup ward for 6 weeks, and all they did was stabilize my medication. They didn't take me off meds, they stabilized. I came out, I went back to the cottage, also a bad move. But that's the insanity, thinking that I could handle this, that I'd be cool now. And the same thing happened. During this time, I'd lost contact with my first wife and my daughter and my oldest son. And my daughter, when she was 5, she decided she had enough of this father. And she told me, listen, I really don't want to see you anymore. At 5 years of age, she told me she doesn't want to see me anymore. And that is part of my consequence. Anyway, I kept contact with Sarah and Matthew and Dougie to a minor degree. Then the second time, I became completely psychotic, and I was readmitted to the lockup wards at Town Hill, but this time for 8 months. And after that, they saw that I couldn't live by myself. So they suggested I move into a halfway house, which I did. And that was the halfway house in Greytown. And they didn't have a room for me at that stage. Okay. But they did have a spare room in the detox center. And there's no weaning off medication or drugs or anything there. It's all cold turkey stuff. And I lived in that detox center for 4.5 years. Not a couple of months, 4.5 years I lived in that detox center with addicts and alcoholics going through withdrawals. And I was on meds all the time, so it didn't worry me at all. And I didn't miss alcohol because I didn't have to. I didn't become a dry drug because I didn't have to. I was stoned all the time on medication. Anyway, that went on for a while, and then I had to move out of that halfway, and I bought a cottage down in Port Shepstone. And just to show an example of where I was at, is when I bought the cottage, I had to get a document from this rehab stating how long I'd been a resident in Halfway. And I said, oh look, it's not a real problem. It was 3.5 years, no hassle. And I got the document, and I've been there for 4.5 years. And I'd lost a year, and I had absolutely no idea what they did. Nothing at all. When I was in the rehab, the patients there used to take physical money bets as to when they saw I was really, really in a bad space, of when they were going to find me dead in my room. And they used to bet me. And the guys who lost were really pissed off about it, but that's the way it is. But yeah, anyway, I bought this cottage down in Shepstone. I moved into Shepstone. And I was there for 6 months, and this is where me being by myself is not possible. 6 months after I moved in there, I picked up alcohol again after 14 years. And what had happened there, and that's a prime example to me of the progression, is I didn't start off slowly. I got back onto the bus exactly where I got off the bus. And then I just went absolutely ape. And the combination of medication and alcohol was explosive, and it was destructive. Not only for me, but for everybody that cared for me. I had friends, but they were drinking friends, and we got on like a house on fire, because we didn't have to give of ourselves to anyone. Anyway, things went on and it progressed from bad to worse, bad to worse. Then the last quarter of 2017 was when my absolute rock bottom started. I was driving in blackout, a mixture of alcohol and meds, and I had an accident, and I killed a child of 9.5 years old, and I put a 10.5-year-old in the hospital for a long, long time. I've absolutely no recollection of that. But all I know is I woke up in jail, in the lockup of the Shetland police station, and I didn't know why I was there, and they had to tell me. My sister, living in Long Beach in California, found out about it before I did on Facebook. That's how out of touch I was, and how little I knew about it. Anyway, the court case continued, and for some reason or the other, and to this day I still don't know what it is the case was withdrawn. It wasn't dismissed, but it was withdrawn. Then in January 2018, I'll never forget the date, 25th, it was Thursday, the night of the 25th, we had a home invasion. And they cleaned us out of everything, all our technology, incomes, and I got hammered around a little bit. And that was traumatic in itself. But the next morning, I got a knock on the door. Because we had no comms, nobody could get hold of us. And Matthew and Ivanka, my now daughter-in-law, were living with me at the time. And it was the handyman, who was a very good friend of mine, of the complex I stayed in. And he told me that my youngest son had just died of a heart attack. Dougie has just passed away. And my world sort of fell apart. If it hadn't been for me being on meds and most probably hungover, I don't know what I would have done. But Matthew and Ivanka were out trying to get phones, and they came back, and I had to break the news to them. And that was not easy. Anyway, my sister came out for the funeral and the memorial, and between them, between my sister, my ex-wife, my children, they decided that enough is enough, something needs to be done. They could see I was really not well. And a month later, on the 28th of Feb, 2018, I went into treatment on the house in the hill. And that's when my journey in recovery started. When I got in there, I wasn't really aware of much, and I was of no use to man or beast. I was human, but I had absolutely no humanity. Something that helped me there was that the people there were accepting of me, they wanted to help me, but they were just like me. They had similar experiences, they had the same disease, but they had a solution. And what happened for me there was a small sliver of hope that was given to me by the people running the facility, being in exactly the same position as I was previously, but were living in recovery and had found something, had found the solution to their problem. And with that hope, things slowly grew. And as I got physically better, because when I went in, I was physically broken, I was mentally broken, emotionally broken. But what I didn't really understand at that stage is that I was spiritually bankrupt. I had no spiritual connection whatsoever. Anyway, as it progressed, it took me 2 months, just over 2 months, to get off my medication. And they weaned me off slowly. And it wasn't easy, but it wasn't that hard. I didn't really find it that hard. And I think that willingness just to change is what gave me the ability to become open-minded, to become teachable, and to become lovable. And that was a turning point in my recovery. After 2.5 months, or 2 and a bit months, I'd started my step work. I'd done step 1, and for the first time ever, I'd actually had a look at myself, who I was, where I'd come from, not why I was. I didn't have any acceptance at that stage. I admitted freely that I was an alcoholic, but I didn't accept it. I came to accept that I'm an alcoholic, that I have a disease that is incurable, it's progressive, and it's fatal if I continued on the journey that I was. By having the sponsor that I have, and the other sponsors and the counselors at the center, as well as the other patients, I was able to start healing. And because I was willing, I was able to surrender, and I was able to take step 1. And by taking step 1, that opened the door, I believe, that opened the door for me to continue with my recovery. I went through the steps, and when I got to my life story, for those that had done it, I thought, okay, well, defects are going to be, I know all about my defects. How little did I know. And my defects were pointed out to me. And my sponsor at the time, on the feedback, everybody went around and they gave their feedback in my life story. My sponsor came back to me and he said to me, Doug, your problem is you become an invalid. And I was taken aback. I was pissed off. I'm not in a wheelchair. I'm not paralyzed. I'm not on crutches. So I asked him what he meant. And what he meant by the invalid is that I come wholly dependent on people, places, and things for my well-being, for my happiness, for my spiritual connection. All that power I'd given away to other people. And I was an empty chattel. And that was the word I used when I described myself when I went into treatment, was empty. But it was exactly the place that I needed to be. I had to be empty. And I was very, very fortunate that that void was filled when I was in treatment and filled by the program. I started to understand that God was whatever I chose it to be. It didn't have to be a religion, it didn't have to be anything. Whatever I chose it to be, as long as it wasn't me, I could get on with it. Anyway, I went through the steps and I learned a lot, and I got physically better. I started to get mentally better. I got emotionally better, and it helped me deal with the death of my son, in as much as that I started to look not so much at what I'd lost, but to look for the gratitude in it. And this was encouraged by everybody there. Everybody, my sponsor, everyone. Look at the gratitude of who Dougie was, what he grew up to be, how he helped people. Having been loved by him, me having loved him, me having known him. And just by turning it to gratitude, I found a great deal of serenity surrounding his death, and I was able to help his mother, Sarah, and his brother and sister and other brother and stepbrothers to a much better degree, because it wasn't all about me. Yes, I was affected. Yes, I was grieving. Yes, I was mourning, but others have known him for a greater number of years than I had. And so if I made it about them, it helped me, which it has incredibly. And gratitude has become a huge part of my recovery, because no matter what happens to me, if I look long enough, I will find gratitude in any situation, even if it is just being sober, just for today, or right at that moment for being clean and sober. Gratitude gives me a totally different perspective on a situation. Coming out of treatment, one of the suggestions of my sponsor was to get into service, and which I did. And when I got into service positions in groups and fellowship, there were a number of reasons how it helped me. Is first of all, by having a service position, I had a responsibility to the group and to the fellowship. And that kept me coming to meetings because I had to be at the meeting to do whatever it was. Eventually that changed because I got to enjoy the service. I got to be part of, I was giving back. And I shared about it the other night. The big change in service came for me when I was introduced to H&I. And that has changed my outlook on service dramatically. Nothing that I am doing today is controlled or given to me by myself. Nothing at all. It has all throughout my life come to me through other people, my God working through other people doing for me what I could not do for myself. Right from when I was born. I was born an orphan and I was adopted. If that's not God working in my life, well then I don't know. And that's where it started. And throughout my life, people have not saved me, but they've helped me. They've tried to do their best for me. And that was God working through other people to help me, to do what I couldn't do for myself. Consequences came with it, make no bones. And eventually the consequences got so big that I had to hit my rock bottom. And without that rock bottom, I don't know where I'd be today. Following suggestions, it was suggested I sell my cottage down in Shepson, and I did. And there was a housing sales slump at that time, so I lost a tremendous amount of money on the deal, but I went through with it, and my life has totally changed. And by me wanting to stay within this area so that I could be part of this fellowship, which is a hugely powerful fellowship, and I shouldn't do this, but when I compare it, because I've met a whole lot of other fellowships outside of this one, the ability that we have here to go to meetings, to fellowship with people that are in recovery is phenomenal compared to people outside of this area, especially here on the South Coast. And yes, just by following that suggestion, I've had incredible rewards. I live in Baisley, an incredible house. Rewards have come. One of the most recent is that those who knew me previously knew I had no teeth. I've now got teeth. And this sounds very weird. I've got teeth, what's so special about that? I got a call on a Tuesday from the dental technician saying you've got to come in and get fitted for your teeth. And I said, what for? I haven't even seen you, I don't even know you. And he said, no, you've got to come in. So I said, okay. 8 o'clock on that Thursday, I went in, he did all the whatever, and 4:30 that afternoon I had my teeth. It was done anonymously, it was paid for anonymously. Out of the blue, I had absolutely nothing to do with it, and I now sit with teeth. If I sound like I've got peanut butter stuck in the roof of my mouth, I'm still getting used to that. But that's just the way it is. So yeah, the rewards that I've received, not only in material stuff, but the rewards I received have been absolutely phenomenal. I feel much, much better. I'm physically much better than I was. I'm emotionally much, much healthier than I was. I'm mentally much healthier than I was. I can remember things, the short-term memory is starting to come back to a degree, but that's all going to take time. But the major thing is the spiritual connection that I've started to develop, and that is evolving, and hopefully will, unless I choose to do otherwise, will continue to evolve. So I sit here today, I'm going to end there, I sit here today in a huge amount of gratitude for this meeting, for being able to share my experiences, in the hopes that it might help somebody, because it most certainly helps me. So thanks for letting me share.